Were we fooled into wearing masks? Do cloth and surgical masks prevent viral illness and transmission? Some hospitals are bringing back mask mandates, but is there evidence to support this? Evidence-based medicine must be the standard of care when making healthcare decisions and not fallacy. It's been almost 3 years ago since my professional organization, the American Association of Respiratory Care, censored my blog article for questioning the effectiveness of masks. The article simply cited peer-reviewed scientific evidence. What we're going to be looking at today and asking the question, are surgical and cloth masks effective in preventing viral illness and transmission? The first study we're going to be looking at is published in the Lancet, and it's titled, Particle Size of Infectious Aerosols Implications for Infection Control. What this study looked at, it looked at droplets and small aerosol particles. In the past, it was believed that it's the droplets that have a high concentration of pathogens and not necessarily the small aerosol particles. But what this study found, it's not the droplets that have the high concentration of pathogens, but it's actually the small aerosol particles that have the high concentration of pathogens. Now, this is significant because both surgical and cloth masks were designed to filter out droplets and not small aerosol particles. And what we find in this article is most particles in exhaled breath are in a median range between 0.7 and 1 micron. Again, that is very significant because surgical masks and cloth masks were never designed to filter out small aerosol particles. With this alone, we can make the evidence that surgical and cloth masks would have no benefit in preventing viral illness, but we're going to look at more information to still draw to our conclusion. What we're going to be looking at next is what does the FDA, CDC, and OSHA say about surgical masks. If we go to the FDA website, we read this. Surgical masks do not filter or block very small particles in the air that may be transmitted by cough or sneezes. We go to the CDC website and we read this concerning surgical masks. Does not provide the wearer with a reliable level of protection from inhaling small airborne particles and is not considered respiratory protection. Now that's very significant because many individuals will cite the CDC for the reason to be wearing a surgical mask to prevent a respiratory infection. But what this clearly states, from the CDC, is the surgical masks are not considered respiratory protection, and they're not a reliable level of protection from inhaling small airborne particles. And small airborne particles are just what we just got done discussing, which have the high concentration of pathogens, not the droplets. The next study we're looking at, or not study, but actually information from the OSHA website, they looked at surgical masks and they came to this conclusion. Surgical masks are not designed or certified to prevent the inhalation of small airborne contaminants. And later on in the article, later on in the information we read, they cannot be relied upon to protect workers against airborne infection agents. What are airborne infection agents? They're viruses. The OSHA is very clear that surgical masks cannot be used to protect workers against airborne infection agents, and airborne infection agents are viruses. But yet in our institutions, medical institutions, we wear these surgical masks as a respiratory protection, but it's very clear from the CDC, OSHA, and FDA that surgical masks are not considered respiratory protection. The next study we're going to be looking at is titled An Analysis of Studies Pertaining to Mask and Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, Characteristics and Quality of Studies through 2023, and this was published in the American Journal of Medicine. This study is very interesting because what these researchers did, they went to the MMWR. With the MMWR, it's the voice of the CDC, and it's also the publication of the CDC. And institutions and government agencies will use this publication to make policies, and hospitals will also use this particular publication to set forth policies with their institutions. And what we read here is that MMWR publications pertaining to masks drew positive conclusions about masks greater than 75% of the time, despite only 30% testing masks and less than 15% having statistically significant results. No studies were randomized, yet over half drew causal conclusions. The level of evidence generated was low, and the conclusions were most often unsupported by the data. Our findings raise concerns about the reliability of the journal for informing health policy. Again, which they should be very concerned because, again, the MMWR is the voice of the CDC, and government organizations and medical institutions will use the CDC to make their healthcare decisions, and such they also use it to institute mask mandates. But what these researchers found is the MMWR had unsupported claims concerning masks. So we cannot say the CDC supports surgical mask or respiratory protection because we just went to their site and it was very clear that the CDC does not consider surgical mask or respiratory protection. And in this particular article, we find out that the CDC had unsupported claims concerning surgical masks in preventing viral illness and transmission. The next studies we're going to be looking at are published in the Cochrane Library. The Cochrane Library is considered the gold standard in evidence-based medicine. An institution will use the Cochrane to set forth policy within their institution. The study titled, and this one is called Physical Interventions to Interrupt or Reduce the Spread of Respiratory Viruses. And what they looked at is surgical mask, and they came to this conclusion. Wearing a mask may make little to no difference in how many people caught a flu-like illness or COVID-like illness. In the same article, they actually looked at N95 masks and came to this conclusion. N95 respirators probably makes little to no difference in how many people have confirmed flu and may make little to no difference in how many people catch a flu-like illness. Again, I thought this one was rather interesting because we're told that the N95 respirator is considered the gold standard in preventing small aerosol particles and enter our lungs. But what they found out in these studies is both surgical mask and N95 masks made no difference in individuals catching a flu-like illness or a COVID-like illness. The next study we're looking at is a systemic review published in the British Medical Journal titled Child Mask Mandates for COVID-19, a Systemic Review. And what they found out is masks made no difference in viral transmission and infection. And they came to this conclusion. It should be recognized that mask recommendations for children are not supported by scientific evidence. Again, I thought this article was very interesting because a couple of years ago, physicians within my area took out a full-page ad in our local paper supporting mask mandates for our children. So these same physicians and some healthcare workers also attended the school board meeting and tried to trump support to getting children back into masks. Luckily, our school board did not take their evidence, and we did not put the children back into masks, which is exceedingly clear by this article that there's no evidence to support that surgical masks or cloth masks prevent viral illness or transmission. And we also know there's actually harms when we're actually putting kids into masks. These harms are associated with learning disabilities, speech impairments, and learning delays. So when we understand that, there's more harm than benefit with actually putting children into masks. The next studies we're going to be looking at is there actually harms associated with wearing masks. And we're looking at 4 studies that demonstrate harms of actually wearing a surgical mask or a cloth mask for an extended period of time. The first one we're looking at was published in Epidemiology and Infection, and it's titled Association Between Face Mask Use and Risk of SARS-CoV-2 Infection Cross-Sectional Study. And what they found in the study is masks actually increased the risk of COVID infection. What they found is that the incidence of self-reported COVID-19 was 33% higher in those wearing face masks, often or sometimes, and 40% higher in those wearing face masks almost always or always compared to participants who reported wearing masks never or almost never. The next study we're going to be looking at, published in Medicine, it's titled A Mechanism by Which Face Masks Contribute to COVID-19 Case Fatality Rate. And what they found in this study, the use of face masks therefore might be unfit, if not contraindicated, as an intervention against COVID-19. And another study we're looking at, an investigation into leaching of micro and nanoparticles and chemical pollutants from disposable face masks linked to COVID-19 pandemic. And what they found out is there's toxic chemicals on masks. We actually wear these masks, we breathe these toxic chemicals into our lungs, thus gets into our bloodstream and causes harm. So they raised the question of whether disposable face masks are safe to be used on a daily basis. The next study we're looking at in scientific reports titled Bacterial and Fungal Isolation from Face Masks Under the COVID-19 Pandemic. And what they found is data demonstrated that the longer a mask is used may increase the risk of infection from bacteria and fungi. Another one we're looking at, titled The Stability of Model Human Coronaviruses on Textiles in the Environment and During Healthcare Laundering. And what they found out is the human coronavirus can remain in infection on polyester for greater than 72 hours, cotton for greater than 24 hours, and polycotton for greater than 6 hours. Again, this study is very concerning because it seems that the longer we do wear a mask, we have a greater risk of actually catching an infection. Again, the coronavirus can remain infection on certain materials for greater than 72 hours, and the previous study we looked at found the longer you wear a mask, increased your risk of a bacterial and fungal infection. So we put all these studies together concerning the harms. It would seem the longer we wear a mask, we have a greater risk of actually getting a bacterial, fungal infection, and actually increase our risk of actually acquiring a viral infection. The last article we're going to be looking at, it's the Ontario Nursing Association wins a second decision on unreasonable and illogical vaccinate or mask influenza policies. What the Ontario Nurse Association did is they actually took some hospitals in Canada to question their decision of placing unvaccinated nurses in masks. And the Ontario Nurse Association won the decision against the hospitals in Canada because what they found out, there was no scientific evidence to place unvaccinated nurses in masks. And William Kaplan made this comment. He found that the St. Michael's vaccination mask policy is illogical and makes no sense, and is the exact opposite of being reasonable. So again, the Ontario Nurses Association won these two cases back in 2015 and 2018, and what they found, there's no scientific evidence to support unvaccinated nurses wearing masks during an influenza season. If we quickly summarize what we went through, the first study we looked at was concerning small aerosol particles and droplets. And what we found out, there's a higher concentration of pathogen in small aerosol particles than in droplets. It's been told in the past that the droplets have the high concentration of pathogens, but in fact, it's the small aerosol particles. And what we do know is that surgical and cloth masks were never designed to filter out small aerosol particles, but they were designed to filter out droplets. The next thing we looked at, we went to the CDC website, the OSHA website, and the FDA website, and what we found is these institutions do not consider cloth or surgical masks as being respiratory protection. And then we also looked at another research article. It was looked at the MMWR publication, and what they looked at is their studies concerning surgical mask and cloth mask. The MMWR is considered the voice of the CDC, and it's also the publication of the CDC. And many institutions will use the MMWR to make healthcare decisions and policies. But what they found out with these studies is they actually published unsupported claims concerning masks in their studies. The next studies we looked at were in the Cochrane Library, which is the gold standard of evidence-based medicine. And what we found here is that both surgical masks and N95 masks, there was no difference in preventing viral illness or a COVID-like illness. And then we also looked at a study looking at the systemic review researching masks for children. And what they found out, there was no scientific evidence of placing children into masks. And then we also looked at harms, and we also found 4 articles we looked at, and we actually found out there is harms associated to wearing a surgical or a cloth mask for an extended period of time. And the last one we looked at was a decision won by the Ontario Nursing Association in Canada. What the hospitals are doing in Canada, they're attempting to force unvaccinated nurses to wear a mask during influenza season, but what they found out, there's no scientific evidence to support placing unvaccinated nurses into masks. What we as healthcare professionals need to do is we need to always question the assumptions, and we need to actually look at the evidence-based medicine. Just don't follow a particular organization or institution because they tell us to do something such as wearing a mask, but does the evidence support wearing a mask? The last thing I'm going to show here is a video of a child attempting to put a child in a mask, and I think this video pretty much sums up the whole mask situation. Thanks for watching the video, and have a good day.
Put your mask on.
There you go. Keep it right there.
Yay, Mason! Yay!
Keep it on, Mason. Look, we're going to keep it right here. Nope. Oh.
Peekaboo, I see you. Keep your mask on. Put your mask back on.
What are you looking at? Come on, keep it on your face. gotta keep it on your face so we go outside. There you go. Mason.